like to start session 10, Navies and Sea Power. Before I begin, just a minor housekeeping point. In your pocket programs, the Z-Fold program, you will notice if you've read it closely that although this session is due to start at 15:40, at 16:20 we go into session 11 on the International Fleet Review, and then 10 minutes before that we're due to actually start the presentation. Just to clarify, the presentation on the RAN International Fleet Review will start at 16:20 and the closing ceremony will start on time at 16:30. But session 10, Navies and Sea Power. And as we've seen, this conference has ranged in the presentations that we've heard so far across time, across geography or space, and it's ranged from ideas of theory to demonstrations of practice. And with this in mind, and this huge scope in mind, I've great pleasure in introducing Dr. Norman Friedman, who is an author that has proven his ability to argue across a large canvas and to bring the many aspects of sea powers and navies together and make cogent and powerful arguments. Dr. Friedman's biography is in the abstract book, and I urge you all to read it and understand the long and distinguished career and publishing history that Dr. Friedman has. Moreover, I would urge you to actually read some, if not all, of Dr. Friedman's books, which are extremely powerful and challenge the way and augment the way that you think about navies and sea power. So without further ado, I would ask Dr. Norman Friedman to present to us this afternoon.
Admiral Griggs is here. Thank you for having me. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and thank you, Captain Andrews. I'll start off where I started off hearing on Tuesday when your Secretary of Defense, I should start by saying don't blame the U.S. Navy for me. I'm just giving my own views. The Secretary of Defense talked about the change in the Australian economy, where there's this enormous belt in the north which produces remarkable amounts of minerals. It produces a large amount of the value of your economy, and we have to defend it. Well, what does that mean? Well, to him, and I suspect that he's just typical, what it means is physically defending where these things are extracted. But think about it. If you wanted to hold this country up to ransom, why would you actually seize that territory? After all, to make it valuable to you, you'd have to take the stuff out of there yourself, and it could be blown up. That is what people do when you grab their minerals or their oil fields or whatever. There was not a word about how those minerals get anywhere else, which is what makes it valuable to you. Without that shipping, this stuff is just junk in the ground, right? And if you don't take the shipping seriously, how can you be serious about protecting it either from pirates or from people with anti-ship missiles? Take your pick. Now, it isn't cheap to protect overseas trade, and it's absolutely correct that we're talking about ships and not somehow roads in the sea. The word slock is a horrible one. But if you're going to be serious about why there's sea power, that's what you get serious about. I've often heard British and American officers talk, especially British, talk about how people don't care about where things come from. And in the United States, if you tell them, well, where do you think your toothbrush came from? Very often it's, I know it's overseas, that damn globalization is taking our jobs away. And I don't know if the reaction would be any different here. However, when you say, where does your income come from, that's different. Now, it may be that we're trying to reach the wrong audience. It may be that the appropriate audience is the financial community that might have the vision to understand that the sea is different. Our problem in explaining sea power is that from a sea power perspective, the world is fundamentally different than it is from looking at a map. That in some way, the sea is a shorter distance than anything else. So that if you looked at the right kind of map, which doesn't exist, coasts would be close together and interiors would be enormously distant. So that the famous line used to be that the Japanese conquered the American car industry because it was cheaper to take a car from Tokyo to New York than it was to take a car from Detroit to New York. They also made them work, which had something to do with it. It's very difficult to get that abstraction across, and yet that's what globalization means. That's what the modern world really means. Now, if this was Switzerland and much of your export were something small like diamond rings or elaborate watches or something like that that you could travel by plane with, okay, I wouldn't be here. It would be sort of a joke. It isn't. If it's heavy and bulky, it goes by sea, end of story. Maybe you can put it on a railroad, but that's not very enjoyable and it's kind of expensive. And railroads are hard to build and even harder to maintain. Once you say that, then maintaining that ability to travel by sea becomes terribly important. Now, what you heard yesterday was that if you have local governments which share the same ideas about what's legal and what's not, it's not that difficult physically. It becomes an administrative problem. They have to have enough ships to do the job. What you have in much of the world, however, is people have very different ideas. If I look at the session on the South, you have a lot of countries that are broke. And they're all supposed to subscribe to the laws that help us. You know that if you're very poor and you're in a legal situation which seems rigged against you, law tends to become suddenly illegitimate. My wife used to be in the judicial system. She saw a lot of that. You think governments don't think the same way? The reason that China will probably end up thinking more or less like we do is they're in the position we are. They're a rich country. And they're probably having some difficulty realizing how rich they are compared to how poor they used to be. But they'll get over that very rapidly. When you look at maintaining good order at sea, there are two things that come up. One is a problem of structure. The last time you had a Navy that talked a lot about good order at sea was probably the Royal Navy when there was a British Empire. And I think that many people here would not really welcome reconstructing the British Empire for some reason. Obviously, I like British warships of that era, so I think it's a terrific idea, but that leaves out the politics and the fact that you might have some national aspirations. Anyhow, if you go back to the golden era of the, say, 1890, 1880, what you see is that the British Empire was basically built on maritime trade. They had a pretty good idea that they had to maintain trade. They had most of the places trade passed through, but they had something else, which was that their Navy had a great deal of, if you like, surplus power that allowed them to operate in those waters. Also, they had a lot looser laws. It was easier to deal with pirates at that time, let's say it that way. What you see over time, in the British case and then in other cases, is that because you don't build navies mainly for good order at sea, you build them mainly for what happens on a really bad day when you have to fight, the number of ships available for those kinds of tasks collapsed. If you look at the Royal Navy in the run-up to World War I, they bring a lot of it home because they need to have those powerful warships in a concentrated fleet. There's some stuff left around the world, but very little, and it doesn't have much power. During World War I, they build enough smaller ships, mostly minesweepers, that after the war, they're available for this kind of job, and they realize it's important. But that's an accident. And if the war hadn't occurred when it did, my guess is that problems like piracy, slave running, which is the equivalent of trafficking people, would have exploded. How do you do it when you can't be everywhere at once? You see, if you look at what happens to navies, the way navies live with fewer ships is they have more reach. So all of those graphs that show fleet size falling don't show individual capability. You can do a lot more with, let's say, an Aegis cruiser than you could do with a missile destroyer armed with Tartar. An enormous amount more. It covers a much greater area. If you're a really nasty person, you'll say, so what happens if it gets sunk? And I think it has a better chance of surviving, but that's a real question. What do you do about reach in this kind of job? You see, in keeping good order at sea, typically, you have to be there. You can't shoot someone up. If a pirate turns up someplace and you know where he is, that's not good enough. You can't just blow him away. Well, maybe. You're not supposed to. It's a police job. If you're worried about someone poaching, you can't go and just sink the illegal fishing people. Again, you know, if you wanted to, that might be interesting, but it's called an act of war. If someone is trying to wreck your natural resources, by the way, you think piracy is bad now. If you see a lot of minerals being extracted from the sea, a lot of oil rigs and things like that, you think those are not worth holding up to ransom? If you can ransom an LNG tanker, boy, could you ransom a drilling platform. Wouldn't that be fun? And that might be one reason you don't see a lot of drilling operations in places where you might not feel safe running them. If you have private armies protecting you and they're not too worried about shooting up people who get out of line, eventually they have to be put down. You know that. Private armies are very dangerous. Well, what do you do about the numbers problem? I don't know. It's a very difficult problem. I can only tell you what the U.S. Coast Guard tried to do, and I can tell you how well it did or didn't work. We got stuck with a numbers problem in the Coast Guard because the cutters we had were dying, basically. And it developed that they couldn't possibly replace them one for one. So the question was, is there anything you can do that somehow enlarges their reach? Well, you go over to a system based on ocean surveillance, of which there were hints before, but no one has raised it very much. If you can see what's going on well enough to know that that matters, then you can vector something there. So you go to faster cutters, but most of all, you go to things you launch from the cutter, which usually means helicopters and interceptor boats. You have something of that in the Armadales in the north. Take a look, you'll notice you have fewer Armadales than you had the ones before. Take another look and you notice that there is special border patrol aircraft with radar. All that stuff goes together. By the way, the cost of those things is one reason the numbers go down. Those are not free. You might see some of that sort of favors air capability because a helicopter, or better, a STOL, can probably get somewhere faster. You might see something of that sort. Dare I say it, a coastal protection air-capable ship. Of course, you know what sort of air-capable ship I would advocate, but not my place. If you talk seriously about good order at sea, you shouldn't just look at dealing with the usual pirates, lawbreakers, people like that. Shipping routes go through choke points. The world is filled with countries that don't like each other particularly. I once thought it would be a very funny exercise to go down a list of countries and figure out where most of them thought their boundaries ought to be. And that's generally in the next country or the one beyond. I thought if you had such a book, you could predict good wars that would happen in the near future and probably make a killing on the stock market that way. Nobody ever wanted to pay for it, and, you know, life is cruel. However, if two countries are fighting and a shipping route happens to pass through, what do you do then? And what does good order at sea mean in that case? Well, we've seen an example. The Iran-Iraq War was fought right around the Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz. And both sides had the clever idea that they would get help from countries because it was so unpleasant to have tankers blown up that the Western powers would just do something to save themselves. The reason that's called good order at sea as opposed to blowing the hell out of Iran and Iraq is that no one had any particular interest in getting involved more deeply in a war. Incidentally, one major value of navies that doesn't get talked up enough is that you can calibrate how much they get involved. You don't need a land base. You don't have to make promises, we will protect you forever if you only give us, this 1,000 acres and armed guards. And if you decide it's not a really good idea, you steam away instead of pulling down the flag in an emotional ceremony after which all your troops are taken hostage. So there were warships from the United States and Britain. I don't think Australia was involved in this one, but I could be wrong. Placed on the Armilla Patrol. It didn't always work. I think the real theory was that if they kept shooting, they would hit a warship and that would trigger a big war. They did keep shooting. They hit the USS Stark. It didn't trigger a big war because it was the wrong side that hit it. But I can understand the theory. The reality was that it did calm the thing down. It did maintain that sea route. And that tells you how important certain sea routes are, as now when we're talking about the Iranian threats to the Straits of Hormuz. That's not the only place in the world where you might see this kind of thing. It's very important to be able to make a credible presence in such places. Otherwise, world merchant shipping, which means your economy, become hostages. And that's the last thing you want. Nobody really wants to start a war over some small conflict between two minor powers, or even two regional powers. And it would be naive to imagine that no such thing could ever happen. Extremely naive. There are other capabilities which have some very interesting consequences. Australia is buying Aegis. The U.S. Navy found that the Aegis system could support ballistic missile defense. Actually could support national ballistic missile defense, which is kind of interesting. But if you go back and you look at international tensions, what you'll find is that ballistic missiles will probably be the weapon of choice when two third world countries fight it out. The reason is, among other things, that you can't buy heavy bombers anymore. So if you want to do a lot of damage, it's either a very expensive fleet of tactical aircraft or buy some missiles. One of the payoffs of missiles is that you don't need a lot of people flying them, so you can have a small but trustworthy group of your own picked fools who will fire these things off. Why do you think the Iraqis really liked Scuds? Now, you can easily imagine a situation in which you have two small countries fighting it out, and frankly, you would like it to stop. But you certainly would not like to favor one over the other, and you would not like to move in troops. We certainly would not. And you would not like to do any offensive action against either one. Sea-based BMD gives you this interesting option of cooling it off without having to be on anybody's territory. And that business about not having to be on people's territory is kind of important. Navies are special that way. There are jobs which can be done cheaply by an Army or Air Force detachment, except you find out that the real expense is in being allowed in, and then the real unpleasantness is when you decide you don't want to be there. You might look at Afghanistan that way, although obviously there's more to Afghanistan than what I'm saying. If you have a world in which there's a certain amount of instability, but you're unlikely to see a lot of large-scale warfare. Things are kind of edgy, but they don't go very far. These are very valuable capabilities, and they're not to be laughed off. Now, the numbers are bad for us, and if you look over time, the trend in numbers of warships is going down. One reason for that is that if you're any government at all, you have to split your defense spending three ways. I used to think it was mostly the cost of air forces, but actually armies are quite expensive because of the stuff they use. Other defense resources, the wide area surveillance, command and control, are not inexpensive. And that choice between having, if you like, a three-dimensional military and having a forward Navy is a very difficult one for any government. If you believe that this is a century of global trade, if land warfare becomes increasingly difficult any way that you might like to go, it may be the century of sea power. That's what I believe. If that's the case, that's where the money ought to go. A lot of governments, once there were three services, had the attitude that there were like three political parties in a coalition. And if you didn't go by thirds, that was not fair. What I'm telling you is, at a crunch point, you can't be fair. By the way, that doesn't always favor us. We were crunched badly in the late 40s, and we favored nuclear deterrence, and we cut the Army and Navy quite badly. It turned out nuclear deterrence didn't work, partly because we didn't have any bombs, and Stalin knew it, which was unfortunate. But when you get stuck, you make very bad choices, or very difficult choices. Bad is not proper. Later we found out that we could pump up the money and it was not that hard. But that was then and this is now. Good order at sea doesn't sound sexy. If your life depends on international trade by sea, you should take it real seriously. Because if anyone stops it up, you're dead. And the way you describe this to the public and to the decision makers who have to decide how to spend money is just that. If anyone wants to hurt you, that's the easiest way to hurt you. Having a lot of troops, and there aren't that many anyhow, defending some mine in northern Queensland doesn't hack it. It doesn't hack it because once all of northern Australia is a mining site that's extremely valuable, the attacker can pick where he wants to go. And the only concentration of targets is in the ships carrying the stuff. Either you protect them, and that's against everything from pirates all the way up, or you're a large, fat, rich guy walking down an extremely dark, unpleasant alley at night in a bad city. That sound familiar? Now, what you've heard before was this is not easy, that modern weapons are quite nasty, ships are getting pricier for whatever you get. The global trade thing means there are more targets, but then it becomes a question of how easy it is to identify your ships as targets. That may not be so easy. These are issues that have to be thought through. Hopefully they're being thought through. Now, if you look at the other side of the equation, if in fact the Chinese government buys the Chinese Navy argument that their prosperity depends on access by sea to resources, then the natural vulnerability they have is by sea. All this other stuff, you really believe you're going to see strikes deep in China by non-nuclear weapons while they have ballistic missiles there that can blow up the United States? This is kind of hard to swallow. Torpedoing a Chinese merchant ship, that's a whole lot easier. Messing up an attempt of theirs to invade Taiwan, that one I'll buy easily. Incidentally, if they managed to mess up such an invasion, it would probably bring down the government. That's not good order at sea, but it's a plea to look at sea power in a practical manner. If you do it theoretically, it just doesn't work. You are now in the most practical position I've ever seen. There's no American equivalent. I can't go to anybody in the United States and say, if ships couldn't go into the port of New York, we'd all starve tomorrow morning. We wouldn't. And the British, once they decided that they were part of Europe, they no longer thought that if the channel were blocked, they were finished. You're unique. It's important. Well, you're not unique. If I were Japanese, I would say the same thing. If I were Chinese, I would think about it. But I'm here, and we both speak the same language, so you're pretty unique. The problem of defending against higher order threats in channels like the Gulf means that you really can't go to a widespread small ship navy that might be very well adapted to maintaining good order, let's say, nearby. For that reason, you're probably forced to more like the ocean surveillance system that I'm thinking of, and you really do that in the North right now. That ocean surveillance won't hack it against subs. It will against people smuggling on a moderate scale. If someone organized a really large smuggling operation, you probably would be saturated. But that's life again. And I imagine if you landed 10,000 people in northern Australia, they'd all die anyway. I would guess that the question is, what can navies do to calm things down? And the calming things down is kind of valuable, and that's what I meant by the BMD part. When you look at your Navy, it's an extremely competent, moderate-sized Navy. What it buys your government is a level of independence at one end, and at the other end, it's the ability to coordinate with other navies in such a way that they need you. If they need you badly enough, their governments listen when your government talks. That's not a bad combination. Now, if you want to go to something where you're independent at every scale, all you have to do is manufacture another 100 million or so Australians, make them into the same thing you are, and then buy the Navy that goes with that. I think I'd be laughed off the stage if I suggested it. If you're going to be roughly this size, you have to have the ability to be so valuable to others that they badly want you to play with them, and they badly need your expertise. I don't know how much of that is good order at sea, but it really matters to you. And it's a message that has to get across. Your Navy is probably uniquely valuable that way. Maybe special forces are the same thing. Your Army isn't large enough to be essential in a larger operation. Armies are more a numbers game. Your Air Force probably isn't that large on a proportional basis either. Your Navy is, because naval forces in general aren't that large. Value it. It's very valuable. It's wonderful. And remember that it has to be very good also to deal with these cases like the Straits, where a few ships can cool something off. That was a very nice operation. It was a very nice result. And I would push BMD pretty hard because it enables you to help cool off some local conflict. I can think of examples of people who hate each other and would like to blow each other up with ballistic missiles. And if you can cool that off a bit, it helps calm things down in a very valuable way. A way which I doubt would work terribly well in open negotiation. Now, I think most of the speakers were a lot more optimistic than I am about avoiding conflict. I heard a great deal about various negotiating forums. I'm sorry, you know, I'm a more depressed person, and if you can be nice, it's very nice, but when people don't want to be nice, they aren't. Navies are for the bad days. Bad days are rare, but when they come, they're very bad. Pardon me for the technical version. And that's my message. It really pays. You can really do very important things. And the high end of that probably is stopping people from murdering each other with ballistic missiles. Thank you. And now you can shoot at me.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Friedman. As ever, thought-provoking and entertaining. I'd now like to open up the floor for questions. By now we should all know the rules. The 4 microphones, please make your way to a microphone to ask a question, and limit the amount of commentary and limit yourself to 1 question only, please. And,
no one?
I'm finding it a bit hard to believe that no one's got a question.
Come on.
Please, Andrew. Mark, sorry.
Aspie, Dr. Friedman, I wonder if, looking at navies in the 21st century, what sort of role do you see for aircraft carriers for medium-sized powers?
This is where it's real lucky that I don't represent the U.S. Navy. I like aircraft carriers a lot. It seemed to me that when you bought the LHDs, if you're going to propel a unit of troops someplace, they deserve air cover. The trouble with air cover that's done from land, from distant bases, is that the pilots spend very little time over the target area. So if you use land-based airplanes for a strike, if you have a series of targets you want to blow up, that works pretty well. If you're doing close air support, the targets are unpredictable because they have to do with how the battle develops. If the planes aren't there all the time, the troops are naked. If air turns out to be the key to their staying alive, then they may somewhat resent this. So yeah, it pays to have a carrier. Now, there's going to be a problem with carriers because unless the Stovall version of the F-35 works out, there isn't going to be anything that'll fly off a non-catapult trap ship. And since the F-35 is now the most expensive item in the U.S. budget, and the budget is under horrible pressure, but the payoff is the ability to get near the target area. It's a very large payoff. If you don't want to do it that way, it's possible you might do it with UAVs that would be kept in the air for very long periods by being refueled in the air. One of the factors in long-range air is pilots get tired. They make mistakes. Mistakes in this case mean either they don't kill the people trying to kill your troops or they kill your troops, neither of which is very satisfactory. A UAV responding to a designated shot where you could designate the target geographically with GPS or something like that might hack it. Manned aircraft at great distances are a terrible idea. There was a horrible case in Afghanistan where we killed a bunch of Canadians, and I think it turns out that it was because it was an Air National Guard plane from a distant land base where the pilot was extremely tired. So yeah, it pays. Now, it's pricey. I suspect you could get it cheaper if you cut out a lot of the bits and you just concentrated on having a platform that could support aircraft and retrieve them, but I'm not sure. But yeah, I'm a carrier guy. Does that help? I like nuclear subs too, so you know. Good luck.
Neil.
Neil James from the Australia Defence Association. Norman, I'm just curious as to what you think of Australia attempting a maritime defence strategy, but without any form of Marine Corps.
Well, I'm not sure of the details of the strategy. I know that a lot of it had to do with what you could replace your current fleet with, and then there was a matter of the 12 new subs. And the 12 new subs were characterized in part as national deterrent, which made sense. I don't know what your choices were other than that. I would have bought you a carrier and the AWDs, and I might have gone cheap on ANZAC replacements, but I don't know the numbers. And it's bad for me to act smart at this point. But you can see the numbers problem because the replacement for the Armadales is a multi-purpose ship with some kind of modularity. And that tells you that the squeeze on numbers is alive and well, and it'll hurt you. Now, the alternative would be something a good deal bigger with a lot of interceptors or something like that. And the one thing the strategy documents never discussed was surveillance. But that's obviously the key to making this stuff work.
If I can ask a follow-on.
Now, presumably there's a classified version that does discuss that.
If I can ask a follow-on question, though. The problem simply is we seem to have a cultural mindset that says maritime power and the projection of maritime power is a purely naval phenomenon. And we don't appear to have addressed the problem of maritime power is more than just naval platforms and the ability to use them. It's the ability to project forces ashore, and this can only be done really with a marinised land force.
Well, but if you look at your land force, my understanding is that they feel somewhat marinised. They tend to talk a lot to the U.S. Marines. So although the document may not have said it, my understanding is a lot of the practice goes that way. Obviously, maritime power is a lot more than that. I wasn't suggesting that I looked at this thing and said, oh, wow, they've got everything right. Look, maritime power also includes your ability to operate MPAs, and it includes whatever kind of anti-submarine surveillance supports the MPAs, which I have no idea about because you've been very good at keeping it quiet. And I know you've modernized your MPAs and you're buying new ones. There's also the question of exactly what the wedge tails do in maritime surveillance, and there's a question of exactly how well Gindley works. All of those things go together in a maritime picture. And I haven't seen documents that talk about all that, partly because it's the kind of thing you don't publish, at least not to outsiders like me. I'm not suggesting that Australian secrets should be my standard reading matter. It better not be.
Commander Gordon.
Yeah, so Commander Flash Gordon, just I do like your term, your use of the term horrible for slocks. Can you take it one step further, and as mariners, how do we describe the sea routes of trade out there? What do you say we should be describing these sea routes of trade as?
How would you attack a slock, or how would you protect it?
No, you in the beginning of your speech you said the term slock is a horrible term.
Oh, it's a horrible term because it gives the impression that there's a road, and it's very well liked, often by civilians who think in terms of protecting this nicely defined road in the sea. But there's no reason that a ship can't go where it wants. I think that in sailing ship days, the routes were much better defined by prevailing winds. But once you have powered ships, good luck. I mean, there are most efficient routes, but there's no reason why they have to take that. So the phrase slock induces people to imagine protection, somehow laying mines along a route or something like that. And it always turns out you can never do enough. These are very long distances. So your choice is either some form of direct protection like convoy, or some kind of attack at source. Or you do some kind of tracking of the bad guys and hit them en route. During the Cold War, we did attack at source. We did trying to find them in the open ocean using SOSUS. We also figured out that we could threaten the Russians where they cared and they would stay home, and that was the strategic ASW stuff. The problem is that anything you do is a horrible numbers problem, because if you're protecting your ships that are moving, you have to form convoys, and the convoys need cover. If the other guy has some kind of ocean surveillance and he can overwhelm the escorts, then the convoy becomes essentially a tasty meal for him. So you find convoy going in and out of style. I'm interested in British cruisers in the 19th century, and that was the problem they faced. They give up on convoy because they can't build enough cruisers. They then figure out that merchant ships concentrate in certain areas, and they figure that a surface raider will be sucked into those areas, so you put the cruisers there. Now, that strategy assumes that he'll get his fill of merchant ships, but you'll get him. You try not to publicize this among the merchant people. I once read a U.S. paper in which we said, it was about 1960, it was actually an extract from it, we'll lose 100 merchant ships a month for the 3 months of the war, but then the Russians will lose all their subs. And again, I think that was not widely publicized. Similarly, at one point, we were very desperate, so we were using things called hot datum. Hot datum is a sinking merchant ship, and we managed to convince owners to put emergency radios in the funnels of their ships so that as it went glug, glug, it was tap, tap, tap. And I think the idea was, their idea was that we would show up with airplanes with lifeboats. Actually, I believe we were planning to show up with airplanes with sonobuoys and homing torpedoes, and the theory was the submarine wouldn't be that far from what it had done, from the mess it created. That went away after a while. But by the way, saying that there will be thousands and thousands of merchant ships, from my point of view, oh great, then I can lose a few and not notice. And that's exactly the way a strategist would look at it. You know, you lose a few, he loses all his subs. Subs are very expensive now, especially nice nuclear ones, bluey, you know.
And on that cheerful note, I think we might draw this session to a close. If I could ask, please, that everyone here thanks Dr. Friedman in the normal manner. Thank you. I'd like now to move straight into the next session, which looks to the future, but looks to the future in a very concrete manner. In fact, we look upon looking forward 21 months to October 2013 with the planned RAN International Fleet Review. And in order to update us on the plans for the Fleet Review, I'd like to welcome to the stage Captain Nick Bramwell, who is the Director of this Fleet Review. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks very much. First of all, I'd like to say that I feel extremely privileged to follow such a distinguished speaker as Dr. Friedman this afternoon, but maybe not so privileged to be the last speaker on day 3 of the presentation. The slides don't seem to be working. No, I want to go back. It's gone too far. As I hope you're all aware, last October, Vice Admiral Griggs extended an invitation to over 50 of his international counterparts, to many of whom are represented here today, to send a ship to participate in an International Fleet Review to be held in Sydney from the 4th to the 11th of October 2013. This review is being held to commemorate the centenary of the first entry of the Royal Australian Navy's fleet into Sydney, which occurred on the 4th of October 1913. For those here who remember the RAN's 75th anniversary in 1986 and our bicentennial naval salute in 88, next year's event will be of a similar size. However, in 2013, we are also including a significant tall ship component to the review, and that's both civilian and naval tall ships. Unfortunately, the slides that are coming up are the first draft presentation, so I'll just keep going anyway. So what is the historical significance? Australia's Navy first formed as the Commonwealth Naval Forces on the 1st of March 1901 as a small coastal defence force. In 1909, in response to increasing international tensions and the recognition that Australia needed to assume full responsibility for its broader maritime defence, the nation embarked on a significant naval expansion program. Its aim was to create a national navy capable of both defending Australia's maritime interests and contributing to regional defence. Here we go. Australia's new fleet took several years to build, but on the 4th of October 1913, the flagship HMAS Australia led the Australian fleet of 7 cruisers and destroyers, HMAS ships Melbourne, Sydney, Encounter, Warrego, Parramatta and Yarra, into Sydney Harbour for the first time. The fleet was greeted by thousands of cheering citizens lining the foreshore, and this was a moment of great national pride and importance, one recognised as a key symbol of Australia's progress to nationhood. Significantly, whilst greeting the 7 fleet units, Prime Minister Joseph Cook remarked that since the arrival of Captain Cook, no more memorable event had happened than the arrival of the Australian fleet. Thus, October 2013 is a major milestone in both the history of the RAN and that of our nation, and one we intend to acknowledge appropriately. The intention is for as many warships as possible to rendezvous, conduct practice exercises, and then to enter Jervis Bay on the New South Wales south coast on the 2nd and 3rd of October for a series of final fleet review briefings, and to also acknowledge the centenary of the Australian Capital Territory. This will be a significant event in itself and essentially mirrors the pre-entry activities of the RAN fleet of early October 1913. The more formal aspects of the review will commence with a formation entry into the harbour on Friday the 4th of October 2013, exactly 100 years to the day after that first entry. The ceremonial review and of the assembled ships will subsequently take place on Saturday the 5th of October in the harbour. Other concurrent activities being planned include a combined naval march through Sydney's Central Business District, inter-Navy sporting fixtures, cultural events, and, subject to the availability of a suitable venue, a 2013 Sea Power Conference and Pacific Maritime Congress and Exhibition are also being considered. This will be followed by a combined fleet departure which is planned for Friday the 11th of October 2013. And on completion of the ceremonial activities, all visiting warships will be invited to participate in a combined maritime exercise, tentatively named Exercise Triton Centenary, to be held off the east coast of Australia. In March 2009, RAN and RNZN units conducted an impressive formation entry into Sydney. You could say it was a practice. It was a very well received and high profile event. However, intent next year is to have a significantly larger formation. Whilst we have to be cognizant of the Port of Sydney's berthing and support capacity, and that's both naval and commercial, we are currently anticipating participation by 30 to 40 warships and up to a dozen tall ships in the review. And we are, of course, expecting similarly benign weather conditions as you see there in the photo. As a percentage of the then population of Sydney, the crowds witnessing the 1913 fleet entry were reportedly very impressive and, as you can see, equally well dressed. In 2013, our aim is to attract a correspondingly significant turnout by the population of Australia's largest city. Something like this. Whilst this photo depicts harbour traffic during Australia's bicentennial celebrations in 1988, it's instructive to note that on New Year's Eve, harbour events, particularly fireworks, draw over 1 million spectators to the harbour and its foreshores in Sydney. This crowd number attracts a commensurate level of national and international media interest and is therefore our benchmark for 2013. Finally, for those of you familiar with Sydney's increasingly spectacular New Year's Eve pyrotechnics events, it's prudent to note that the first time the Sydney Harbour Bridge was ever used as a centrepiece for the city's fireworks was during the RAN 70th anniversary in 1986. Now, of course, it is internationally recognised as a key component of annual New Year's Eve celebrations throughout the world. As a young lieutenant in 1986, I was seconded to the 70th anniversary planning staff to help coordinate the fireworks. And this is a photo of that inaugural event. And I must admit, the final major shell burst was actually supposed to occur over the centre of the bridge's arch, not offset to the south, as you see. So it's seen that 27 years down track, CN's given me the opportunity to get it right this time. And with the help of our international friends and domestic partners, that's exactly what we plan to do. So to the Chiefs of Navy and their representatives in the audience, we look forward to welcoming your ships and their personnel to Australia in 20 months, and that's 20 months to today, to help us commemorate the centenary of the Royal Australian Navy's First Fleet entry to our spectacular harbour city. Thank you very much.
Please remain in place while we have a musical interlude, and we'll get the official party up on stage for the closing ceremony. Thank you.
Ben, ready?
Australians, all let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare.
Please be seated. And I'd now ask the Chief of Navy, Vice Admiral Ray Griggs, to address the conference. Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon. Good afternoon, Vice Admiral Chris Ritchie and Mr John Jeremy, distinguished guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to this final part of the Sea-Power Conference of 2012. This year's theme, the naval contribution to national security and prosperity, has clearly, I think, resonated throughout the week. With such a broad theme, we've been able to explore a variety of topics, notably the experiences of our neighbours, friends and allies, the importance of international law of the sea and its relationship to Australia's posture as a maritime power. It was good to see a wide range of views expressed, both in papers and in question and answer sessions. And importantly, I think it was good to see that not all presentations reinforced orthodoxy. The Minister for Defence talked of the conceptual and practical challenges for Navy in the progress report of the Australian Force Posture Review. I think it's fair to say that we should also add opportunity to that list. And I look forward to the progress of the review and the final version of it and its input into what will be an important white paper process in the next 12 to 18 months. I've been delighted to see so many international delegations attend the conference, and again I thank you for the journey that you've made. Away from the conference floor, I know that there has been some crucial interaction, further strengthening our understanding of the key issues that we need to work with. I've been very happy to see so many members of the Navy here at what is a very important professional development activity for junior to senior. It doesn't matter the rank, it's a great development activity for us all. It is, of course, our people who remain at the heart of our capability and our people who each day execute the naval mission, the naval part of our maritime strategy so professionally. And I enjoy, in fact, I like very much repeating how proud I am of our people in this uniform in this country. I will continue to say it as often as I can for the rest of the time that I'm the Chief of Navy. Sometimes it's not said enough. This is our largest Sea-Power conference to date, and with more than 1,500 delegates, as I mentioned on Tuesday. The next conference, as Nick has stolen my thunder, will be held in October 2013, subject to a venue. And that's the only reason we're caveating that at all, is that this facility may not be operating at that point in time because of a major redevelopment here at Darling Harbour. But we look forward to the International Fleet Review and the conference being held at the same time. It will be a significant event, and I hope we see many of you back here at it. So as the conference itself draws to a close, there are a number of people I must thank for their efforts in not only this week, but in the months leading up to this conference. In the first instance, we've had the privilege to hear from many distinguished speakers throughout this program, many of whom have travelled from afar to share their expertise. And on behalf of everyone who has attended the sessions, I would like to again thank our speakers for their efforts in making it here and delivering such top-class presentations. I'd also like to thank the many RAN staff from the Sea-Power Centre, from Navy Events, from Navy International Engagement, from the team in my office, our ships and our people here in Sydney who have worked tirelessly to coordinate an exceptional program, including a number of social events. Of course, there is no show, there's certainly no Sea-Power conference without the band. And again, they excel. And they are a part of the Navy that we should be incredibly proud of, and I thank them for their outstanding job. I'd also like to thank Maritime Australia Limited for providing a fantastic exposition to go with the conference. I think there's been a terrific feel to this conference, and it's great to have the ability to enable defence and industry to have that opportunity to strengthen the relationship and for us to see what is out there in the marketplace. Finally, thank you to all of you who have attended and contributed over the last 3 days. I think the discussions have been enriched by your perspectives, and I look forward to seeing you back in Pacific 2013.
I'd now welcome the Chairman of the Organising Committee for the International Maritime Conference, Mr. John Jeremy, to address the conference.
Vice Admiral Griggs, Vice Admiral Ritchie, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Well, as I expected, the last few days have passed in a flash. I hope you all have been able to exercise that ideal time management and extract the maximum benefit from the excellent conference programs. In the International Maritime Conference, we've had presentations on a wide range of topics. Not surprisingly, many, indeed most, have been Navy related. Today's naval program and that of coming years presents many challenges and opportunities for our young engineers, naval architects and scientists. It's an exciting future, and meeting those challenges will present many opportunities for bright young Australians and benefit for the nation as a whole. Despite this focus of the conference, I'm pleased to say that we've found time to consider matters which might be regarded as equally important to Australians. For example, the design of circular wave tanks for surfing. So as we close Pacific 2012, it's my pleasure now to thank a wide range of people. Maritime Australia for organising the exposition and strongly supporting the International Maritime Conference. The Royal Australian Navy for its huge contribution to this event. The IMC Organising Committee, and particularly Adrian Broadbent and his team on the Program Committee. All the authors, presenters and session chairmen, and all the delegates from Australia and overseas who've taken part and provided the real value of the last few days. Kat, Angie and the Aranex team, who have kept everything running smoothly behind the scenes. And of course, our sponsors, without whom the IMC would not have been possible: BAE Systems, Lockheed Martin, UGL and Defence Health. Thank you very much for your support. Our next event, Pacific 2013, will be a couple of months earlier than usual, but for a very good reason. Being able to say it's next year makes it seem even closer and adds to the incentive to make it a very special event. We'll soon be starting our planning once we've had a chance to draw breath over the next few weeks. Thank you all for coming, and for those who've travelled long distances to get here and will have a long distance to travel home, bon voyage. We look forward to welcoming you here again next time.
And finally, I'd ask Vice Admiral Chris Ritchie, RANR, to come up and address the conference. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Gordon. Chief of Navy, visiting Chiefs of Navy and senior officers, so Mr. John Jeremy, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Maritime Australia Limited would like to congratulate both Navy and the International Maritime Conference on the successful completion of their respective conferences. As we've come to expect from their reputation for excellence as the leading maritime conferences in this part of the world, they have again been essential to the overall conduct and success of the Pacific 12 International Congress in Exposition. And those reputations have certainly been upheld this year. And as we've heard, the conferences have been outstanding in their coverage, outstanding in their quality, and quite successful in their ability to promote some vigorous and sometimes controversial debate. We welcome that. Pacific this year has drawn extensive media coverage and comment on the issues and the challenges that face the Navy and the maritime industry in the next couple of decades. That's a great thing. The statements by Ministers Smith and Carr have put the spotlight on the things that we all know that we must resolve and improve if we are to provide this country with the maritime expertise, efficiency and security that it must have to prosper as an island nation dependent on sea trade. So I thank the Navy, I thank the IMC, the speakers, and you, the audience, for a significant contribution to the progress of maritime matters and the raising of those matters in the public awareness. Maritime Australia Limited is certainly well satisfied that its mission to promote our maritime industries is being fulfilled well, or has been fulfilled well, at Pacific 12. It's not quite the end for all of us, however. Like its namesake, the ocean out there, Pacific 12 rolls on, at least until 1500 tomorrow. But I take this opportunity to thank the exposition exhibitors and seminar participants for their efforts in putting on a magnificent show at Pacific 12. Maritime Australia Limited really does look forward to Pacific 2013 in October next year, and as you know, that is in lieu of the event in January 2014. The International Fleet Review, Pacific 13, and the celebration of the arrival of that first Australian fleet in October 1913 will certainly make for a truly memorable event. Whatever happens to this venue, we will have a venue. It will be on Sydney Harbour. Maritime Australia Limited aims to make Pacific 2013 the best yet, so don't miss it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance, and that concludes CPOWER Conference 2012. Thank you very much.